is the brand new FMS FCX10 LC80 Land Cruiser, and today I'm going to show you how to turn this into the ultimate easy FPV trail rig. And throughout that process, I'm going to be answering all the questions you had on this hardware. But before we do that, we need to take a closer look at this truck. It shares the same model name as the other FCX10, but under the hood, it's pretty different. And then finally, we're going to install a surprisingly bright light bar and try to run this thing FPV at night. First of all, we've got a really beautiful, fully licensed Toyota Land Cruiser LC80. You can see we've got hard plastic bumpers, a roof rack, mirrors, fender flares, and even a little snorkel on the side. This has a new style of body retainer. You just give it a quick twist in the front and in the back, and then that body comes straight off. Underneath the body, you can see it has a nice half interior. I think that's what's going to help us install that FPV system without any special tools. And then you can see we've got magnetic connectors for the lights. That means you don't have to take any wires off when you take the body off. We've also got a nice light controller here. We also get a good look at the body side of the new clip system, which engages here on the chassis. You've got two tabs that retract and a little spring-loaded button to push the body off. I found this body mount can be a little fiddly to re-engage. The best way to do it is to sit the body on, flip the whole thing upside down, and then push where it latches. You'll hear it click in the front and rear, and then you're good to go. Under the hood is where things have really changed from the other FCX10. As you can see, there's no servo here, and there are no servos here. That's because whereas this transmission is still a 2-speed, it's full-time 4-wheel drive, and these axles don't have selectable lockers in them, they also are not portals. Let's take a closer look at one of these axles and see how it's different inside. To get this wheel off, you've got a nice little decorative center cap that just unscrews, and then we've got a standard nut here. While I'm taking this off, if you love these sort of deep dive technical reviews, make sure you get subscribed. We've got a lot more coming. Removing this, we see we've got the same tire that came on the other FCX10, though we do have a unique Toyota wheel. This is a pretty standard tread pattern. It's based on the Super Swamper TSL full-size tire, and a lot of RC tires use the same basic tread pattern. It feels medium soft and should be great for FPV trail bashing. Underneath that, we've got sintered steel 12mm hexes, and attaching the axles to the chassis, we have steel forelinks in the rear, as well as in the front. So far, I'm pretty impressed with what you get in this vehicle, especially given the price, which we'll discuss at the end of the video. Those axles are suspended from the chassis by some nice aluminum threaded body shocks. These feel really smooth and they're nicely tuned from the factory. And then what we have here is a basic solid axle. I think FMS does a pretty good job with these. This truss looks really nice and it's a pretty nice scale looking unit. And pulling the differential cover off, we've got no real surprises here. This is a pretty basic locker style differential. Nice big bearings here, and as you can see, these are spiral bevel machined gears. One thing I noticed is that this is obviously the same housing they're using for their selectable locker style differential, and that means there's a big hole here where the lever would normally go through. You might want to plug that hole before you go bashing, because that's going to let debris and water in. Unfortunately, that hole isn't really appropriately sized for any screw, so I just put a little blob of hot glue in there. Nice thing is that's reversible if you ever wanted to put a selectable locker in this axle. And of course, the front axle is basically the same. We've got all steel links, a locked differential, and steel CVDs. And finally, we need to pop this transmission out of here to see if it's a different design or if they just left parts out. This is a really nice and easy to work on design. Pulling just 6 screws makes the motor super easy to remove. We have an adjustable motor mount here that isn't infinitely adjustable, but it does give you different positions for different size pinions. And then to go along with that, we've got a plastic spur gear. And then removal of this transmission is very straightforward. It's only held in with these 2 screws. You do, however, need to be careful of this shift linkage. I'm just going to go ahead and remove this servo with the transmission so everything stays in line. And then we just need to pop the front axle off, and here we go. This transmission does look quite a bit smaller than the other FCX10, so I do think they've simplified it inside, but of course there's only one way to find out. Pulling this apart, we get our first and I think only encounter with the dreaded 1.5mm hex bit screw. Not really sure why this one's smaller, probably for space constraints. Okay, a quick prayer to the crawler transmission gods that I don't get a face full of gears. And here we go. We can see we've got an all steel geared transmission. This thing looks really, really nice. All sealed bearings inside. A little bit of grease on things. Overall, a very clean setup. This is definitely a simplified design from the other FCX10, which makes sense because it has less to do. And I'm just going to very carefully put this back together. Perfect. One really important thing to note on this transmission is that the outputs go in opposite directions. I'm spinning this one counterclockwise and this one's going clockwise. What this does is equal out the reaction torque to the chassis. So under heavy acceleration and deceleration, the whole thing doesn't tip back and forth like you see on some crawlers. All right, let me get all this back together, then I'll show you just how easy FPV can be. Now, if you missed FPV Part 1, first of all, it's probably time to go ahead and hit that bell to get notified of future videos. But second, let me briefly explain what this is. FPV puts you in the car and lets you see things from the driver's point of view. And this is the easiest and best way to do that. This is a 3-part system from Caddx. It consists of a camera, a gimbal, which we'll talk about in just a minute, and then a pair of goggles. There are 2 different pairs of goggles you can get. These are the Avatar Goggles L. They're for the walksnail system, and they're made by CaddxFPV. You can also get the Avatar Goggles X, which are the higher end ones. However, until recently, the Goggles X hardware wasn't compatible with this gimbal. They do make an add-on for it, or if you buy the latest version of the Goggles X, it will have the compatible hardware in it. You just need to make sure you are getting that latest version. How you'll know that, I'm not 100% sure. You'll have to talk to the retailer you get it from, but it is nice that there are 2 different options now. These goggles are pretty straightforward. You basically just smash them on your face, look into this screen, and you see whatever the camera sees. These goggles also have a place for an SD card. They allow you to record video, as well as upgrade the firmware, and upgrading the firmware might be important. Well, again, we'll talk about that in just a minute. Those goggles will connect to a camera and VTX. There are a few different cameras and VTXs that are compatible with this system. This is the Avatar HD Pro Kit. It comes with the video transmitter, your antennas, the camera, and a bunch of cables. You're going to connect that camera to a gimbal. There are 3 different gimbals available. Again, this is all done by Caddx. You can check their website out for purchasing, or check any of the FPV quad retailers in your area. In the United States, places like GetFPV should have all this hardware available. The 3 different options are a single axis, a dual axis, and a 3-axis gimbal. What this refers to is the degrees of freedom that the camera will have. As you can see, this swivels, it rocks back and forth, and it also tilts up and down. The beauty of this gimbal is not only can it track your head movement, but it also automatically stabilizes the camera, which is something that previous systems didn't do. Something I saw in the comments of the previous video was that this was not a new system, and no, FPV is definitely not new in Surface RC, and even head tracking isn't new, but this is the first time that I'm aware of that you've had good integrated head tracking and stabilization in a system that's relatively easy to put together. And like I said, we're going to put this in the LC80 without any special tools. To see which VTXs are compatible with this gimbal, you can look in the manual for the gimbal. That's again available on the CaddxFPV website, or you could just ask Caddx or whichever retailer you're going to be buying this from. Putting this hardware together is relatively straightforward. There's a little connector on the back of the camera and a little connector in the gimbal. They can be sort of tricky to put together if you don't have good eyesight or maybe shaky hands. You might want to get someone else to do this part, but they just click in place with each other. And then once you've done that, we just screw the camera to the gimbal, making sure we don't pinch that wiring in the process. Doing this setup might feel a little bit intimidating at first, but I promise if you just take it one step at a time, it's really not that complicated, and most of the parts only have to be done once. Once we've got that camera mounted up, you can see all the degrees of movement that it has. The only other major hardware setup we need to do is connecting the camera to the video transmitter. This is what takes the camera signal and spits it out to your goggles. Again, relatively straightforward. We've just got a couple of covers on here we need to take the screws off for. This cover here has the exact same connector that you saw on the camera itself. We just carefully plug that in. If these connectors don't plug in easily, it's probably because they're misaligned. Make sure you don't force it because you can damage them. Once you've done that, we just pop the little cover back on, and then we're just going to do the exact same thing for the little antennas that go on the other side. And once you've got that done, this thing's pretty much set up. There are a bunch of wires that come with this, but most of them are for an FPV quad, and all you really need to do now is supply power to these 2 things. I believe this can run on anywhere from 2 to 6S, so how you power, it's completely up to you. I just have this set up for a 2S balance cord, and I'll run it off a separate battery in this crawler, but if you have a 2S battery in whatever you're using, you could just use the balance lead off of that. This does not use a ton of power. The only other thing you'll have to set up is a small cable that goes between the gimbal and the VTX for the VTX to control the gimbal. I'll plug this stuff in later once we get everything mounted up. I know all of this works because I've used it before. However, before you mount everything up, I'd recommend testing it all out. There's one very important consideration before you use this. These VTXs are designed originally to work on quadcopters, and those quadcopters have a ton of airflow, which is why you don't see a fan on here. If you're going to be using one of these on the bench or in a car, you're definitely going to want some airflow on this VTX because it will overheat if you don't have it. I've just got this little 25mm fan I'll put on here, and we're going to run that right off the car. To make this work, all you need to do is bind the VTX to the goggles. Binding instructions are in the goggles manual as well as in the VTX manual. Then you just go into the menu system, activate the gimbal hardware. There's a video that CaddxFPV put out that shows you how to do that as well. If for some reason that doesn't work, you may need to update the firmware on your goggles or on the VTX. Again, instructions on how to do that are in the manual, but you will need a computer in order to do it. If that still doesn't work, you might need to update the firmware on the gimbal. You'll need to contact Caddx on how to do that because they don't include the hardware for upgrading the firmware, but they will send it to you if you need it. From what I've heard, the latest versions of this hardware won't need firmware updates though, because they'll already come with the latest firmware on them. So that's the basic hardware setup done. I know it sounds like a lot, but it really isn't bad if you just take it one step at a time. Now let's get this thing installed in the truck. And to do that, we're primarily going to be working with this body. Obviously, every vehicle you put FPV in is going to be different, but the goal is to get the camera in there, get it reasonably well mounted, and make sure it can see through the windshield. Fortunately, the stabilization of the gimbal will take care of pretty much everything else. First step here is going to be to pull this interior out. For this interior, that was pretty easy. It was only double side taped in, and we're going to put it back together with double side tape. One of the main concerns I saw in the previous video was that I was using 3D prints in order to mount everything up, but that's really not necessary. Even if you needed to create a mount like this, you could just take a piece of wood, drill holes in it, and mount the gimbal that way. There's really nothing complicated about mounting this gimbal. It just needs to be mounted. The primary mounting system for this gimbal is these 4 screws, and they're on this shock mount, but I'm actually just going to take these off, and we're going to double side tape this right to the interior. I'm not 100% sure how that's going to work out because we are losing a bit of the shock mounting, but it should put some serious stress on this gimbal and give it a good durability test at the same time as showing just how easy it can be to install. I'm sure Caddx doesn't want you to do this, but I want to find out if it's going to work, so let's do it anyway. And I think we're just going to double side tape it right here to the center console. And we just push that down with some VHB, and that's it. It's mounted. Again, this is probably not the ideal mounting system, but I want to show you just how easy this can be. And to be fair, it's actually pretty solid. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the VTX back here. We're just going to stick it in the back seat. Another thing people were concerned about was the range of this thing, and that's something we're going to be checking out here in just a few minutes. Now we're just going to stick that down in the middle. Easy as that. I've just added a little spot of VHB to the antennas, and this installation is pretty much done. I said we're going to do FPV at night, so the last thing we need to do is swap out these really nice looking but fairly decorative lights and install this serious light bar. Fortunately, this is also going to be very easy to do because the stock lighting uses the same connector as this light, so we're just going to have to unplug that, plug this one in, and we'll be good to go. This light bar does come with mounting hardware, but we're going to keep it super simple again with, you guessed it, some VHB. Now you might laugh at this and say this is not going to stick, but car manufacturers use VHB to install trim panels permanently on their vehicles, and I can guarantee you, if you install this correctly and give it time to set up, it will stay. One thing a lot of people don't know is that pressure adhesives do take time to come up to full strength. VHB can take up to 24 hours. And there we go. Let's get this back on the car. Now that we've got that done, we literally just need to plug this in where the other one was. And I gotta tell you guys, I think it looks really, really good, even better than those stock lights that came on this car. Now I'm gonna put all this back together. Let's go see what kind of range this thing has, what kind of experience you can get out of it. Then we'll see if it'll work at night. All right, guys, here's the final result. We've got the camera in the front, double side taped to the center console. We've got the transmitter in the rear, a really nice light bar up top. And then underneath, we've got that light bar plugged directly into the receiver. We've got a balance plug to power the camera, and then another plug to power the fan for the camera. I did double side tape a little block of foam to the bottom of the interior. And don't forget, we did all of this with nothing but some double-sided tape. Let's see how the new LC80 does. All right, guys, let's see just how far we can go with this thing. As you can see, we're going to be driving all the way across this field. This field's about 2 football lengths long, and I suspect that we're going to be able to make it all the way to the other end. Let's speed this video up. As you can see, this is a lot of fun. This is a great perspective for driving around. The terrain looks totally different when you're inside the car, and it's a completely new experience. Okay, I just ran out of range, but not on the FPV. I ran out of range on my transmitter. All right, guys, so here's the real deal. We're gonna try and see just how far we can get real world range with this. We've got some pretty rough terrain out here, some obstacles like trees and whatnot, but I still think we're gonna be able to do really well with range. And again, this is an absolutely amazing experience. We can even see the little driver next to us here. We can look down, see the steering wheel. I think that a crawler is probably your best bet for doing FPV. FPV in a bashing car is a lot of fun, but driving slowly like this gives you a totally different experience, and honestly, it's really relaxing. It really lets you explore the environment in ways that you just wouldn't be able to. I mean, this is just a little trail right here that normally you would drive through in about 3 seconds, and you wouldn't even notice it, but in this, it feels like a complete adventure because you really don't know what's coming in front of you, and it just feels really, really awesome. And as you can see, the stabilization is amazing. amazing. Even though the truck is at an angle, the goggles are keeping the view straight. When you have an FPV camera just tied directly to the car, it tends to really bounce you around, and it can kind of make you a little bit nauseous, to be honest with you. All right, let's shift this thing into high gear. There we go. Now we're getting some speed up. Of course, you want to be careful. Try to make sure you understand where you are, because if you're going too fast and you end up flipping the car over, you're going to be walking for it. And if you don't know where it is, that could be a problem. Get this turned around on this dirt road here. And we'll pick up a little bit of speed. As you can see, the car is tipped to the side, but the view still looks straight, which really helps keep you oriented. And again, this is just a ton of fun. You can look up at the sky, you can look down at the ground at the instrument panel, you can look outside to the right and left. You can even check your rear view mirrors. Again, an experience like you cannot get anywhere else. All right, guys, let's see what this thing can do at night. As you can see, it's pretty dark out and we really can't see much of anything at all. We can make out a few basic shapes. I think I see a tree in front of me, but now let's go ahead and turn that big light on. And as you can see, it makes a huge difference. First of all, there's a ton of bugs out here. Second of all, I probably need to clean the windshield, but as we drive around, you can see that it's actually really easy to see. And this is yet another completely different experience from normal bashing and driving around. Being able to explore at night is really, really fun. You do need to be aware of where you are though, because obviously a bright light like this is going to attract some attention if people see it. Overall though, driving around at night is a totally cool experience, and I definitely recommend it if you get one of these FPV setups. So there we go, guys, the brand new FMS FCX10 LC80 converted to FPV the easy way. Now let's talk price. This LC80 is $300 from FMS, and then the FPV system is going to cost you around $500 if you use the goggles L. Of course, these prices are going to be different if you're not in the United States. And if you decide to go with a different camera and VTX, it could be less or it could be more. And of course, these things go on sale sometimes, so what you pay might end up being wildly different from those numbers. I will have a link to this LC80 down in the description. If you want to get this FPV hardware, check out the CaddxFPV website or any of the big online FPV dealers like getfpv.com. Again, of course, GetFPV is in the United States. If you're in a different country, you'll just have to look up where the parts are available in your country. Now, all that being said, I think this is absolutely worth it. It is a lot of money and it's a little bit of complication to get set up initially, but this provides an RC experience like you've never had before. Seeing it on video doesn't convey just how awesome this is. It's been awesome to have you hang out with me throughout this video. Why don't you hang out with me in one of these videos?